For generations, many of us grew up with a picture of Christianity shaped by European figures. Jesus with light skin, prophets with European features, and heroes of the faith, whose faces resembled the ones we see in Western churches. These depictions have become so ingrained in our minds that we often fail to see the rich and diverse reality of the Bible. The truth is, when we look at the Bible, we realize that Africa, with its vibrant culture, history, and people, has always played a crucial role in God's divine plan. But for too long, this role has been hidden or erased. What if I told you that Africa, not just in ancient times, but from the very beginning of the Bible's story, has been one of the most vital parts of God's message to the world? What if I told you that many of the greatest leaders, prophets, and figures of faith in the Bible had African roots? And more importantly, what if I told you that their presence isn't just a footnote, but is woven deeply into the very fabric of God's story of salvation? For so long, many of us have been taught that Christianity and its central figures were part of a European narrative. We've been shown images of biblical characters with European features, making it hard to see the African presence that is rich, powerful, and undeniable in the Bible. But it's time we change how we see the Bible. It's time we look at the stories of faith with a new perspective, one that reveals the African influence on the biblical narrative. Let's start with a name that everyone recognizes: Moses. When you think of Moses, you probably think of him leading the Israelites out of Egypt. But did you know that Moses wasn't just in Egypt? He was raised in Egypt, one of the greatest African civilizations. Exodus 2:10 tells us, "When the child grew older, she took him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son." Moses' story isn't just one of a man escaping slavery. His very identity is tied to Africa. The name Moses itself is Egyptian in origin, meaning drawn from the water. Moses' life and calling were shaped in Egypt, one of the most powerful African nations in the Bible, and he would go on to lead the Israelites into freedom. Moses' African roots remind us that Africa was central to God's story of salvation. The very land that was once a place of oppression became the backdrop for one of the most miraculous events in biblical history, the Exodus. From the heart of Africa, Moses became the leader who would bring freedom to God's people. Next, let's talk about the Queen of Sheba, an African ruler from Ethiopia, who played a major role in the history of Israel. In 1 Kings 10:1-2, we learn that when the Queen of Sheba heard about the fame of Solomon and his relationship to the Lord, she came to test him with hard questions. The Queen of Sheba's journey to Solomon wasn't just about wealth, it was about wisdom. She sought out Solomon not just for his riches, but for his spiritual and intellectual insight. Africa, as represented by the Queen of Sheba, was a land of wisdom, a place where people sought understanding and truth from God. The Queen of Sheba's visit is a testament to the great influence and wisdom that Africa brought to the world stage. She wasn't just a guest, she was a powerful leader whose kingdom was part of God's unfolding plan. Let's also remember the Ethiopian eunuch, one of the first people in the New Testament to embrace the gospel of Jesus Christ. In Acts 8:27-39, we read the story of how an Ethiopian man, a royal official, was traveling back from Jerusalem and encountered the Apostle Philip. This African official was reading the book of Isaiah when Philip explained how Jesus fulfilled those prophecies. The eunuch accepted the message and was baptized right there in the desert, marking one of the earliest conversions to Christianity. The Ethiopian eunuch's story shows us how Africa was among the first to embrace Christianity, not as an afterthought, but as a place where the gospel took root early in its spread. The African heart was one of the first to receive the good news, laying the foundation for the gospel's expansion across the continent. But perhaps one of the most powerful, yet often overlooked stories in the Bible is that of Simon of Cyrene. When Jesus was carrying his cross to Golgotha, it was Simon, a man from Libya, modern-day Africa, who was forced to help Jesus carry the cross. In Matthew 27:32, we read, "As they were going out, they met a man from Cyrene, named Simon, and they forced him to carry the cross." Simon wasn't just a bystander. His involvement in this pivotal moment of Jesus' journey to the cross shows how Africa was intricately connected to the defining moments in the life of Jesus. Simon, a man from Africa, played a role in this crucial event, linking the African story directly to Christian salvation. Even the prophet Zephaniah, a man who likely had African roots, possibly from Cush, ancient Ethiopia, delivered a message of hope and restoration for the nations. In Zephaniah 3:10 we read, "From beyond the rivers of Cush, the daughter of my dispersed people will bring offerings." Zephaniah's reference to Cush shows that God's plan was always global, involving Africa in the restoration and gathering of his people. Zephaniah's words are a reminder that the African people were not outsiders to God's plan, but were integral to the coming of salvation. The Bible doesn't just mention Africa, it celebrates it. The figures from Africa in the Bible are not afterthoughts or secondary characters. They are essential parts of God's story. Whether it's Moses, the Queen of Sheba, the Ethiopian eunuch, Simon of Cyrene, or Zephaniah, Africa is woven into the very fabric of the biblical narrative. It's time we stop seeing the Bible through a European-centric lens. The Bible is a global story, one that celebrates the diversity of all nations, and Africa has always been a key part of that story. Moses' leadership, the Queen of Sheba's wisdom, the Ethiopian eunuch's faith, Simon's sacrifice, and Zephaniah's prophecy all remind us that Africa is deeply embedded in the redemptive story of God. So the next time you open the Bible, remember that the African story is your story too. It's a story of wisdom, faith, leadership, and sacrifice that has shaped the faith we hold dear today. It's time to celebrate the truth that Africa was there from the very beginning, and its role in God's plan is far greater than we've ever been told. In modern times, Africa remains a place where faith is alive and thriving. The church is growing rapidly on the continent, and millions of African Christians continue to embrace the legacy of their biblical forebears. Africa's spiritual strength, resilience, and commitment to faith are visible in the churches, the communities, and the worship that fill the land today. Just as in biblical times, Africa continues to serve as a powerful beacon of faith, hope, and divine wisdom. As we reflect on Africa's deep-rooted presence in the Bible, we should celebrate its continued significance in the global church. The same wisdom, faith, and leadership that shaped God's plan through figures like Moses and the Queen of Sheba are still present in today's African believers. Their stories and their faith continue to inspire and strengthen the worldwide body of Christ. Now, more than ever, it's time to recognize and honor Africa's role, not just in the Bible's past, but in the future of God's kingdom.